The war is over. A treaty or peace agreement has been signed, and that's the end of the conflict, right? Far from it. Every peace process is a complex endeavor, and peace itself needs to be secured. And throughout the 20th century, this has been far from easy. War and peace. Two opposites that seem clearly defined and require little definition in popular perception. But if we take a closer look, no two wars have ever been the same. Their causes and outcomes are always different. And today, we have a lot of different words for different kinds of wars. Civil war, war of independence, trade war, global war, total war, asymmetric war, Cold War, the list goes on. So, if we have so many different words to describe the differences in warfare, we probably need to have a look at different peace processes to see how different peace itself can be. And the ultimate question, especially for the people previously affected by the conflict, at what point can we speak of peace? Did we achieve peace after a ceasefire, full demobilization, after a complete end of violence, or only when the post-conflict economy is flourishing again? We'll take a look at two different parts of the world and how their paths towards peace looked after two very different kinds of war. Our first example is Rwanda. How did the Rwandan society find peace after civil war and genocide? Rwanda was ravaged by ethnic tensions between the Hutu and Tutsi ethnic groups ever since colonial rule was established in the late 19th and early 20th century. These tensions culminated in a civil war between 1990 and 1994, and ultimately led to the Rwandan genocide, in which the Hutu majority of the country killed up to 1 million Tutsi and moderate Hutu between April and July 1994. The genocide was planned and executed by the political elite of the country, like politicians and members of the armed forces. But civilians and local militias were the ones that actually carried out the killings. The genocide was only stopped when the Tutsi military was able to overthrow the Hutu government and end the civil war. Around 1 million people died in the genocide. 7 out of 10 Tutsi didn't survive. Big parts of the population were physically or mentally injured after witnessing the genocide, and the nation's infrastructure was badly damaged. But still, these two groups needed to find a way to again live together in the same comparatively small country. Following the genocide, more than 100,000 people were imprisoned in just 19 prisons across the country. Prisons that were designed to hold not even 20,000 inmates. Many lawyers and judges were either killed or fled the country. So it was estimated that it would have taken the remaining justice system more than 100 years to process all these inmates, even as they put a heavy strain on the already crumbling economy. Furthermore, the international community had been heavily criticized for its lack of involvement during the genocide. But shortly after the end of the civil war and genocide in late July 1994, the UN Security Council called for the establishment of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda to prosecute the people responsible for the Rwandan genocide. The court's main focus was high-profile instigators of the genocide, such as local politician Jean-Paul Akayesu or Jean Bosco Barayagowiza, who operated a radio station with widespread coverage in Rwanda during the genocide that called for extermination of the Tutsi. The tribunal was established with an annual budget of $100 million and had 800 employees. It indicted 95 people and convicted 61 of them. Since the genocide had been carried out by local militias, and in some cases even longtime neighbors became the perpetrators, the country itself also tried to solve major challenges internally on top of the high-profile prosecution. 1. Creating peace within a society of which the perpetrators of the genocide were still a part. 2. Identifying the perpetrators and supporters and bringing them to justice. 3. Creating a timely justice and reconciliation process in a country in which the social elites, normally necessary for that, are either dead or were themselves part of the genocide. The solution Rwanda found to these challenges was what is known as Gacaca courts. These communal courts are a traditional justice system that was already in place in Rwandan society, and they were adapted to deliver justice, reconciliation, and public remembrance all at the same time. In these Gacaca courts, trusted members of a local community would be appointed as judges, and trials would be held in public with at least 100 visitors. While the system has been criticized for not meeting Western judiciary standards, the Gacaca court still succeeded in bringing victims and perpetrators together in a public forum. And they have become an international example for reconciliation after a civil war. The events of the Rwandan genocide are almost impossible to comprehend and can't really be compared to other events in recent history. The peace process in Rwanda is equally singular. Present-day Rwanda has been criticized for a lack of political freedom, and other forms of violence have followed the events of 1994. But isn't the extent of peace and prosperity already created in a relatively short time span quite remarkable? Should the international community have done more to support the peace process, or rather, should we learn from the Rwandan example and question whether reconciliation on a local, personal level can take place in international tribunals? Let's take a look at another example with a very different kind of conflict and thus a very different kind of peace process. The Korean War raged on the Korean Peninsula from 1950 to 1953. It was not only a clash of two local militaries, however, but can be seen as the first big ideological proxy war of the Cold War. South Korea was supported by a US-led and UN-backed coalition of countries, while North Korea was supported by China and the USSR. After 3 years of fighting and a death toll in the millions, the Korean War ended in a military stalemate. Well, an armistice agreement was signed and a demilitarized zone between the North and South Korea was created. But did the conflict really end? The Cold War itself had only really just started, and both North and South Korea aligned themselves with the superpowers that had backed them during the Korean War. U.S. troops and equipment were stationed in the South. Politically, South Korea transformed into an anti-communist dictatorship. North Korea followed a particular state ideology that was based on Marxism and included permanent mass mobilization of the armed forces. Throughout the Cold War, there were numerous military and political incidents which cost Korean and foreign lives. In the 1960s and 1970s, there were several hundred raids and incursions by the South into the North, and vice versa. Some of these incidents, like the 1976 Panmunjom Axe incident, in which 2 U.S. soldiers were killed in the demilitarized zone, almost triggered a return to open hostilities. North and South Korea also hashed secret plans to assassinate their respective enemies' leaders. Both countries' infrastructure and society were built upon a readiness for renewed war, with extensive civil exercises and armament programs. During that period, several attempts at a permanent peace agreement were made, but the Korean conflict survived the end of the Cold War and is still going on today. In recent years, North Korea began to develop nuclear weapons, which led to international condemnation and wide-ranging sanctions against the already politically isolated country. In the eyes of the North Korean regime, such weapons would ensure the survival of the country, especially since they could be used much farther abroad than just against South Korea, potentially even reaching the US. At the same time, the South Korean economy is flourishing, and the country transformed into a high-technology-focused industrial nation, while still officially at war with North Korea. Should we call this an armed peace? Can a peaceful society be at war or ready for it at the same time? The Korean nuclear crisis escalated in 2017 and 2018 after a series of North Korean weapons tests, but it also led to a renewed effort to end the Korean conflict peacefully once and for all, and to a series of historical meetings between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and South Korean leader Moon Jae-in. Even US President Trump met with Kim Jong-un in 2018. Although the US had long followed a policy of declining direct diplomacy with North Korea, an end to the state of war between North and South Korea has been promised for late 2018. So, 2 different conflicts, one in Asia, one in Africa, that were fought in distinct ways and resulted in 2 unique peace processes and with different actors and institutions, and a very contrasting role played by the international community. On the Korean Peninsula, a decades-long armistice created further tensions, occasional armed clashes, and a continued arms race leading up to nuclear proliferation. A Cold War that survived the Cold War. In Rwanda, an unimaginable eruption of violence traumatized the country and its society for the foreseeable future. Still, so far, that country managed to find its own path for reconciliation and ultimately and hopefully peace. Is peace really just peace? Can the Korean conflict be considered mostly peaceful even though both sides are prepared for renewed conflict? Is this form of peace the right way for this specific conflict, and how can its lessons be applied to present and future conflicts around the world? Can the Rwandan peace process be applied to other conflicts in the region or globally? Was there any other alternative for the country with overflowing prisons and a threat of renewed violence? These are some of the questions that need to be considered when we want to create lasting peace. And the 20th century after the end of World War I offers plenty of examples that are worth investigating. Together with international scholars and experts, we want to find answers during the Winning Peace Conference 2018 taking place in Berlin on the 11th and 12th of October. In multiple interdisciplinary panels, we'll take a look at the world after the end of World War I and the new world order it created. If you're interested in the conference, you can find a link for the free registration and more information by following the link in the video description below.